Catching up once again with Bill Taylor. Been a few weeks now, and every time we get together, I just really enjoy the conversation. I know that Bill keeps his hand on the pulse of a lot of our politics, and also doing a lot of really interesting deep dive research at his blog, Deep State Analytics. So once again, welcome Bill Taylor to our show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me again, John.
Oh, you bet, man. It's always a fun ride. And one of the things that I guess I wanted to make sure and cover tonight is since you are right there in the thick of things in New Jersey, I think a lot of people are starting to perceive both Cuomo and Murphy as kind of going off the rails. And in that their response to the pandemic has got an awful lot of flack, at least in the media that I look at. And maybe that doesn't reflect much about the mainstream media, but what's going on from your point of view? And maybe if you could just touch on both of the governors.
Sure. It's interesting. We were saying right now Cuomo is in a lot of catching a lot of heat because one of his, I believe his secretary, one of his aides, said that they kept some information from the Department of Justice that showed that there was an excessive number of deaths of COVID deaths in nursing homes and elder care facilities in New York, the state of New York. And this is going back to last spring, say that at the height of the COVID panic. And what apparently was happening was Cuomo actually mandated that a lot of these facilities take in COVID patients and almost purposefully disperse them among the population of relatively healthy elderly patients. Of course, they're all elderly and they're in nursing homes, so they're not necessarily in the best of shape to begin with. So you really had this COVID disease spread throughout this very, very fragile portion of the population, and a disproportionate amount of the actual COVID deaths are attributable to these this risky age group, and particularly if they were in these nursing homes. I think somebody was doing the math. I know we've known about this since the last April and May. The alternative media picked up on it very quickly. But the reason why we're hearing about it now again is because his aide mentioned it, and now because the mainstream media in the New York area can't ignore it. It's not just a silly blogger or a right-wing lunatic talking about it. It's the official government. It's an official government aide is discussing it. So yeah, you are hearing it. But it's been around a while, but now that the media, I guess, feels it's safe to come out and admit it that Cuomo did these things. They're going after him. They're talking about having him resign. Even the Democrats in the state legislature in New York are calling for him to come up with some answers as to why he authorized this last year. And on the heels of that, you also have Governor Murphy in New Jersey, who essentially did the same thing. He has not caught as much heat as of yet, but what he was essentially, at the time, we figured they're just padding the body count. Get as many dead people in these as you can, just so you could say that this COVID is an absolute, panic situation. We have to shut down the economy. But Murphy's in on it too, and so but just the way that the media works around here, you're not seeing as much information about Murphy. But they're both in a lot of trouble. If you just go back to the hospital ship, I think it's the Comfort, was on the East Coast. It arrived. I believe Cuomo gave his order to mix patients in at the nursing home on March 25th. I believe it was March 26th. President Trump announced that the Comfort would be arriving 4 weeks ahead of schedule, and that it was there the next Monday. It was there within 7 days. So it was almost looked like a setup at the time, because there was absolutely zero excuses for Cuomo to put these people in the nursing homes. They had a huge hospital ship that was empty. that Jacob Javits Convention Center, which was empty, all those space, and it was just it was all for politics and padding the body count, as far as I'm concerned.
And now, what about New Jersey? Phil Murphy almost looks like a clown figure sometimes. He's always being caught in public without the masks and everything. Well, it's politics that I don't really know much about. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel that you can see as far as these? I mean, if Cuomo goes, then some other knucklehead will come in, right? I mean,
Right.
New York's always going to be a blue state unless something incredible happened. So, what do you think? Are we making any progress in terms of? Well, that's an example. The idea that now the work that we did, or folks like us have done a year ago, is now actually turning up in mainstream press with regard to the nursing home controversy, and I think that's great. What else can you tell us that's positive? I think that's a theme that I've been noticing today, both myself and then George Webb in his show today was talking about how we need to give a positive message. We need to answer the hate with something positive and talk about how really our country could be, should be, and will be great again if we can just expose this.
Well, yeah, I no, you're absolutely right, and so that's that's where I think our mission is. All we can do is expose it, but I think exposing it really takes it convinces a lot of people that these are not isolated events. This COVID buffoonery was not an isolated event. If you consider how corrupt and how endemically corrupt these institutions are. Now, what I've been looking into, there's a on Twitter, there's a vibrant community of Murphy haters, and it's fun to make fun of the guy, and it's very easy as well. And one of his favorite terms is knucklehead. He calls everybody a knucklehead, and he's he's a knucklehead. So along those lines, from the work that we've all been doing, and sort of in my focus on sort of historical context of it, if you look at Murphy in a historical context, he falls right into this crowd of multi-generational criminals, I guess you could say. And this is the reason why I brought up Murphy tonight is I haven't written all that much. I've written a few articles about Murphy, but one of the more interesting tracks that I'm sort of taking, and this is on the heels of Pelosi's disclosure a couple of weeks ago, that Pelosi's father was very mobbed up and likely connected to some heroin smuggling rings in the Baltimore area. But you start to look at Phil Murphy, and he comes from a pretty pedestrian Boston background. But the wife is interesting. The wife is named Pam Snyder Murphy, Pamela Snyder. Her father was owned 14 car dealerships in the Norfolk area when he passed away in 2018. But there's I believe that there's something here that would suggest that he was probably in a pretty nefarious business, or maybe I might be getting ahead of myself. But the car businesses were formed in the Norfolk area, founded in 1964, and you look at Norfolk in those late 60s, that's when the container ships really started to come into that port. And at one point I read that the U.S. Navy was shipping 1,500 container ships a month to Vietnam at the high point of the war, say 67, 68. So he forms his car dealership in the Norfolk area. He's from Norfolk. The family owned a store there for years. Right as cargo shipping becomes more mainstream, all these cargo ships are going to Vietnam with supplies and food and bullets for the soldiers, but they're also coming back, and you can't help but wonder what they're coming back with in 1965, 1966, 67. And actually, if I can get the screen to split correctly, I'm going to try it right now. And I'm going to show you a little chart. Let's see. Does that hook up? These are that chart right there, probably make it a little bit bigger, is New York City Medical Examiner Office of Heroin Overdose Deaths, 1918 to 1971. You can see when things start to fall apart as far as the heroin epidemic occurs in this country. You're looking, the rise is precisely in line with what was going on in Vietnam. That's all the heroin coming back from Laos that the CIA was shipping in.
Well, I just have to jump in and just say, hang on a second.
Mm-hmm.
There's the TDY mission, which you know about that Doug Valentine wrote the book about the mission that was launched to catch the CIA buying heroin from from the Laotian drug lords, and that was my father's mission. It was the mission that my dad sent, called TDY. It's the book by Doug Valentine, and that happened in 1967, in the early part of 1967. So if you look at that chart, it's evident what happened. Maybe you could put the chart back up again. If I wanted to show if, let's see.
I'm back.
Oh, okay. Can you show me that chart one more time? I just wanted to make a point about the numbers there, because that's what's so amazing about this research, and is it does just help illustrate my dad's life and career so well. Now, if the 67 is, it's about 7 or 8 bars from the right, and that's when the TDY mission happened. And of course, the outcome wasn't successful, so the heroin increased and increased and increased. It's so fascinating. If that TDY mission had been successful, and they had made the proof that they needed, they could have shut down the whole thing right there in 1967. And it is after that that it explodes, and into 1971, and in 71, of course, in June, that's when my dad dies.
Mm-hmm.
So that is very meaningful to me, and I hope you see what I'm saying there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's there's a couple different angles you can look at this. I mean, it's what's kind of interesting. I remember that community. I had a cousin who had an issue with heroin. This goes back to the 80s, but it was very, very pervasive in the 70s. It wasn't something that we saw in high school in the 80s. I guess the 80s were a perfect time to be in high school. But certainly the 70s, you have Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground and all this sort of heroin chic type stuff going on. But what I think is interesting is that I like the idea that not only do you have the Vietnam War, so now you have your source of heroin, okay? Because there was always heroin out of Indochina. That's where the French got theirs, and that's presumably why the CIA decided to get involved in Vietnam. But you also have shipping containers, intermodal shipping containers, which means you can ship it all the way from Vietnam to Cleveland or New York or Detroit without anybody really touching it. If it was a typical cargo ship of the 50s or 40s, 50s era where you have 12 guys hoisting ropes and nets and using all kinds, probably more than 12 guys, the whole longshoreman idea of taking crates off small crates off of a ship. Then there's a lot of room to get caught, a lot of room to get pilfered. You're moving it from truck to ship, from ship to truck to smaller truck. But intermodal transportation lets you take it the entire route from Southeast Asia to the Port of Long Beach in California, or the Port of Norfolk on the East Coast, and then from there onto the same container goes on the back of a truck, and now it's somewhere somewhere in some inner city somewhere where where it's sold right off the truck almost. I mean, I'm sure there's interim people, and that's where it gets, we'll get even more speculative. But what I find interesting is that, number one, now we're talking about back to Tammy Murphy's father. He owns these car dealerships in Norfolk in 1964. They're still around. He's got, as I said, he passed away, but there's now I think there's 11 car dealerships, and it seems like a good way to launder money if you had a car dealership. Especially you're in a Navy, the largest naval port in the world, one of the largest container ship companies in the world, and if you go back and look at some of the history of what the family had done, the family owned a large department store in downtown Norfolk, and it was they sold clothes. They had 350 employees at one point. As the downtown area started to decay, just like and people started moving to the burbs, you see this with all kinds of downtown areas. That's when he opened up his car dealership. And these, if you consider that some of our biggest, most well-known suspected drug dealers or human traffickers, for that matter, are also in the clothing business. Baltimore was known as one of the largest wholesale clothing ports in the country, right near Norfolk, and it switched to Norfolk with the container ships. But you have Wexler was in the department store wholesale clothing business, and Peter Nygaard, who was just arrested a couple weeks ago, a Canadian, was also in the wholesale clothing business. But you wonder if this was not, and there's always been rumors, I think Whitney Webb brings it up on different occasions, that there's some belief that Wexler was using his limited brand stores and his other stores to basically move drugs through, into the smaller towns and exurbs and malls of America. Container ship comes in with something from China, and it's 90% clothes, and it's 10% something else. So there's more to develop here, but I'm kind of suspicious about how Murphy, who was a knucklehead. When I say knucklehead, he's not the brightest guy in the world. All right, he kind of falls into $1 billion gig at Goldman Sachs for 23 years, and I'll give Goldman Sachs some credit. You have to be a smart person to make that kind of money at Goldman Sachs. So I'm not going to take that away from Goldman Sachs, but he might have known the right people. And if you sort of look at Nancy Pelosi as well, the reward to her father for whatever his father did was getting her a legit position. She didn't have to become part of the crime family, and I would think that a lot of these people are like that. It's the reward is money and power that's not really involved in the criminal end of the business, and we get stuck with somebody like Murphy. He's almost too stupid to get there any other way, I would say.
Well, Knucklehead was one of my dad's too. He would. It was one of his nicer ways.
It must have been. My father said it too.
Anyway,
it's a term for him. But I'm working on something more for Murphy. I think anybody wants to go look. There's plenty of stuff on Murphy. The wholesale clothing business is suspect. The grandfather's middle name is suspect because I can't find where he gets the middle name Brown from. And Brown to me says Brown Brothers or Alex Brown and Son, the cotton merchants out of Baltimore. The whole Brown family. Just an unusual name. He stationed in the UK for a while. There's a number of flags here that need further work, but I'm not going to let Murphy off the hook.
Well, you brought me a nice memory that haven't thought of this moment since it happened. Was my dad one time took me up to Baltimore, which was quite a trip, from Southern Maryland to Baltimore back then, and we parked over by the old the roundhouse, the railroad roundhouse for the B&O, and we were right there, and there was a warehouse next to it, and inside of it, they were having this sale of menswear and men's suits, and we went in there, and he bought a couple, and I think I was supposed to get one, but it's a memory that I didn't have until you mentioned that probably 50 some years ago or 60. I was when I got to go out and do something with my dad, I remembered it, even if it was just going to a hardware store or something. I wanted to ask you also, because you do keep a track of financial stuff. One of my thoughts earlier this week was about quantitative easing. And does there come a time when if we bought enough of a company's stock, we as the country, that we own it, that kind of is a way to convert a company, to do a nationalization, but with their consent because we're paying them for it, I keep thinking that if we could just get control of these big multinational corporations, that we could turn this around and make them work for us again the way they're supposed to. I mean, governments create corporations to do things on behalf of the government, and it's been completely turned around so that government now has to respond to the needs of corporations. Just looking for a way to turn that around, but generally, is that what's really going on? Is we're still got a lot of quantitative easing, and the government keeps buying stock in order to keep the dollar from crashing? Something horrible like that. Is that how you see it?
The buying the stock of a company is a difficult way to get control of it. If you really want to gain control of it, you buy the bonds of the company, because you're a debtor. You're a creditor, and you have a priority over the shareholders. So it could be something nefarious going on in that the government can buy all the stock it wants, can own 99% of a company, but the bondholders, decide that we're not going to let you refinance, or they could all collude not to refinance something, or it might be just not refinanceable. Then the company goes to the creditors. So I would, and the government can own all of it, the stock. It becomes meaningless, because you just dilute your 99% interest down to a 1% interest and tell them to go take a walk. It's a function of the bankruptcy laws and how credit protection works, or credit priorities work.
I figured that lawyers had already figured that out. Maybe we could tell, next time, get bonds, don't buy stocks.
Well, now you make me think. The government never does anything correctly, either out of incompetence or evil. For one way to go waste and sort of get everybody on the idea that the government is controlled is to buy a stock. But if they go out and file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy tomorrow, the shareholders, the government shareholders own essentially 0% of the company. The bondholders own the company. So that's probably, it's more important who owns the bonds than anything.
All right. Well, what's going on though? There was just hardly a hiccup when the transition from Trump to Biden. With the political animosities as high as it is, I'd have thought that there'd been some kind of a bump or something in the market. Have we reached a point where the market doesn't even care about politics?
Yeah, one of the scarier thoughts that I had earlier in the year was when we were locked down here in New Jersey. Say the April-May type period, and you really couldn't go into your local hardware store to buy a screw or a can of Raid. You could only go into Home Depot. If the Great Reset is going to happen, and there really are nefarious plans to get rid of all these small business because you can't control them, right? You can control Home Depot because there's only one board of directors, and they control 5,000 stores in the United States. So any policy that you tell the board of directors to implement, it could slow down. Mandatory vaccines, whatever it might be. But you really can't do that for 50,000, small businesses that are in the hardware businesses. So those hardware businesses the small ones that go out of business and file for 11 or Chapter 7, they're not competing with Home Depot anymore. So conceivably, revenues and your long-term outlook for Home Depot should be vastly improved over taking out the competition. Home Depot and Lowe's become the oligarchy, the monopoly in that sector, and you don't have anybody, competing against you on a smaller scale, which collectively I'm sure far surpasses the type of revenue that a Home Depot could do, but that's only if they're in business and placing orders and accepting customers. So I see that as well with the pharmacy industry. I think that's done a little bit better, but there's certainly some sporting goods is actually one that's really not that essential, but they'll leave the big box Dick's Sports open, and they'll close the local bait and tackle shop, or the local hunting or uniform shop. So that's good for the big corporates. So I wouldn't doubt if the valuations of the stock market reflects a big portion of the economy taking a header, and that only those big boxes will survive.
But the stock market is not going to go down, is it? It's still going to be up there because the big boxes have such a big portion already.
Right. Well, they're the big box. They're the only ones with a market cap. So you can say that the stock market should be reflective of the broader economy, but it's really not. The stock market is reflective of big corporate giants who are big enough to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange or the S&P 500 or NASDAQ. It doesn't reflect the vast majority of the economy, which is small and medium-sized businesses that don't have a stock listing.
Yeah. I was studying, and actually my show this morning was about the reporting of a man, Gallagher. I think his first name is Peter or Paul. Forgive me, Mr. Gallagher, but you wrote an essay which I think is really important. And one of the things that he said that I wanted to talk to you about was this: that in order for the Great Reset to work, the people have to lose confidence in the government being able to handle the crises. And what's going on now with the pandemic is that all summer we were told, how Trump can't handle it and Trump has screwed it up and hasn't, got a plan. And they're still even saying that today. I saw the vice president saying that today, that, Trump didn't have a plan. Well, really, in reality, he did have a plan. In reality, he worked very hard on it, and I think he quite surprised them by seizing the lead on that story. But I think that was a very important thing, in that he preserved the authority of government to run the response to the pandemic. As Paul Gallagher, thanks, that's who it is there on my show from this morning. So he kept the government's role at the top of the pyramid, whereas I think what we're going to see with Biden is, he's going to put a fireplace in and he's going to kick back and he's going to, roll, lay on the floor with his dogs while, the experts handle everything. He's not going to be a hands-on leader, and he's going to let the Pfizers and the GlaxoSmithKlines and the big pharma and the big Bayer and everything else to just kind of start running the economic policy and the responses to the pandemic, without so much just kind of getting the government out of the way. And that is how the COVID becomes a foot in the door for them to do the Great Reset, which really is the permanent elimination of Main Street, the permanent elimination of your small hardware store businesses that we all enjoy going to so much. And I know what you're talking about. We've got a family of hardware stores, down here in Southern Maryland that I've been going to since I was a little kid, the Hungerfords. And You know, I like to see the Hungerfords have another generation or two of hardware stores. So anyway, that's what I think Klaus Schwab is talking about, is how they need for government to fail. And
Right.
so here we have Cuomo, who's obviously going to has, you know, very much on the edge of becoming a public failure. Maybe Murphy and Whitmer will follow along, and but instead of Trump being the the big colossal failure, that these guys will be the colossal failure. And in any event, the takeover by the big corporate cartels of things that we really should be looking to our government in terms of a national or international pandemic, for instance. It's almost like you need government to lead in big crises like this, but breaking down our reliance on government and diverting all the funds into corporate coffers instead of taxpayer, responsibilities.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like it becomes a perfect fascist state when you let the corporations run everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, what I always think, these guys are always a lot not as smart as they think. I mean, they'll consider every eventuality. I always think of Hayek and Frederick Hayek, the Austrian economist, and basically the argument is that you can't run a communist state because you don't know who likes ketchup and who likes mustard, and so you're never producing enough. You never have enough mustard, and you never have enough ketchup in the proportions that everybody wants. But the market will solves that problem. It doesn't worry about who likes ketchup and mustard. It just it just sells what it can, and then some of it is wasted. And but you're never getting into a guessing game to decide what everybody's going to do. What kind of economic decisions they're going to make. I mean, people make a million, maybe not a million, but they make a couple hundred economic decisions probably every day. Whether it's just, should I take this route or should I take that route? Should I take the garbage out now or wait till I get home? They're all, if it's just a function of saving time, so really time or wasting time, it becomes an economic decision. So they'll get ahead of themselves. They get ahead of their skis, and they won't be able to anticipate the black swan events of individuals. There's the whole idea of the digital currency. Well, I can see certainly the dangers in a digital currency, but people will just trade something else. They won't. People want to have a physical currency. They'll figure out a way. There's always a black market. There's always a black market in the Soviet Union, and that was locked down very, very hard. Unless they go tend to shoot us all, but even then, people are going to shoot back eventually. They don't think of these things all the way through. They think it's a great idea for whatever reason, and they don't consider, take away my currency, then we'll trade bullets, we'll trade nails, we'll trade foreign currency, just so we have something in our pocket, and so that we could walk around without being tracked. They're just. I would imagine they're making. I would imagine if they had great reset plans, they're probably adjusting those plans every single minute. Even to the point where it might make sense to throw out a guy like Cuomo, who they said that they would be loyal to, but he's expendable. So let's throw him under the bus. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but we'll throw him under the bus because we need to make a statement about this and adjust our narrative more to the idea that government is dysfunctional, therefore we must change it. And we didn't intend to get rid of Cuomo. We didn't intend to get rid of Murphy, but they're expendable. They're not that bright anyway.
Yeah. I think that it's possible that they may actually take that route now that it's, as I say, it's once again attributable to the work that was done by yourself and many other people in this context a year ago. And I think George Webb stuff is really coming to a head now too. Isn't it amazing the way that the January 6th event just kind of put everything into focus so well, and the narrative, the official narrative, it just doesn't hold water. And the impeachment was a farce, and the evidence was not presented, and it wasn't there. And so what they're left with nothing but to try to do the old repeat the same thing until the people believe it trick, and just repeat it over and over again. They're back to the basic simple message of Orange Man bad. And but they're going to try to use that to just eliminate people that not particularly enamored of Donald Trump, but are what we call patriots, people that want to preserve the Constitution, that want to preserve the American dream, the idea of liberty and justice being our birthright. We want to preserve that, and that is being turned into a negative. Like how far can they go with this? I think that my sense of what's going on now is, I put it into my title this morning. It's Reset America. Let's get America back into a productive mode, like President Trump wanted to do. We don't have to do it with President Trump. We can still do it, and if we don't do it, then we have to show people what's happening. Why is the Texas? Why are they having the rolling blackouts? Why did they have them in California? What's going on? Why don't we protect our infrastructure? Why don't we protect our people? Why can't we have enough power to prepare even for this extraordinary storm that people are suffering through in Texas right now? Why isn't America back on track, aiming for its own people to be warm, safe, happy, healthy, and not spend so much time supporting military missions overseas? And that's the struggle of our generation, I'm afraid. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the optimistic view, I hope it's a sign of that they're losing. That you look at the censorship. Every time they do something, events like a Kennedy assassination or 9/11, they expose themselves. And this January, I would lump the November 3rd election to the January 6th fake riot. Part of the same effort. But they expose themselves when they do that. They know they lose audience. They lose confidence. You could see a situation where they're sort of forced in their corner to sort of taking it to these extremes, because they don't have they control the media just like they did, just like they might have controlled the media in '63, but nobody believes them anymore, or at least half of the country doesn't believe them. Where in '63, you might have got 90% of the media, 90% of the population believing that Oswald shot Kennedy. And then after 9/11, I think you lose more people. Now they're to the point where the media can't articulate their narrative any longer, because it's just not trusted, and so they just resort to censorship to limit what the information that we're providing to the public. And maybe like those hardware stores, we outnumber the media in that our message is getting out there, and people are listening to it, whereas the mainstream media might be getting out there, might be being broadcast, but that ship has sailed, and nobody's the American Pravda now. I guess the old Soviet saying was that everybody knew that Pravda was lying, right? But in this country, it's taken a long time to realize that for most of the population that our media is spewing the same type of propaganda. The Soviets were almost smarter in that respect. They knew they were being lied to. Now people are just finding out that they're being lied to.
I think this idea that that there are the Trump people that voted for Trump are in a cult. I think that might be the high water mark of their campaign to discredit us, because it doesn't make any sense to say that anybody that voted for Trump is in a cult. But they're saying it. I mean, I had an old friend of mine say it to me on Facebook, said, "You're in a cult."
Right.
I'm not in a cult.
It was 7 million people.
What are you talking about? But that's part of what they have to believe now, that this is part of the narrative. And that's how, they're going to, if they had their way, they really would start putting us into camps.
Oh, easily.
Re-educating us.
Right. I don't doubt that at all.
We obviously have got some kind of a swami, a guru that's been messing with our minds, because how else could anybody vote for Donald Trump? Right. And there's still, it's just this incredible distracting of attention that's been going on ever since this started with the Orange Man Bad campaign, where they said, look at Trump, look at how bad Trump is, look at this shiny thing, and that whole thing distracted the whole entire liberal community from the reality of the horror show that is really behind them, in the form of the DNC with Podesta and all of the Clinton people. That horror is now coming, and there's no way to avoid it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the military pressure all around the world is increasing. It's very stressful. They're talking. We got one general talking about, there might be a nuclear exchange, and this is not good. Well, I'm hoping that people do seriously back off from this idea that just because somebody chose Trump over, boardroom Biden, or whatever you want to call Biden, the Biden bot, because I chose Trump over, if I did, not saying I did, but people that did, doesn't make them into some kind of a nutcase or a cult. And that's how far they've had to go now. They've had to really dig that deep that they can't give us even the slightest bit of credibility, because if they do allow us to say, hey, let's be reasonable, let's look at the facts, let's pull out George Webb's videos from January 6th and show everybody and say, look at these people, wandering around experiencing democracy and having a pleasant time. This is not the way that the mainstream media told the story with their cherry-picked video and still pictures. So it has to come out if they let us talk, and that's why they're just trying to just shame us into a corner so that we won't even have the benefit of saying, famously, can I say last words, before you blindfold me and shoot me,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just what I'm finding interesting is seeing some of the more level-headed lefties in the mainstream. I wouldn't call them mainstream media, but level-headed lefties. I think of like Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, who does his show. He's funny guy to watch. There's these Eric and Brett Weinstein, who were red-pilled, not necessarily red-pilled, but got the shock of liberal indoctrination at the university level. They're coming at it from their other angle, and I think they might feel a little bit freer now to stand up for the First Amendment and speak out against censorship of the right, from a principled point of view. Now that they don't have to worry about Trump or being accused of a Trump lover or a Trump cultist. They were never Trump cultists to begin with, but that's what they got accused of for saying that YouTube censorship is bad. I think there's probably a pretty sizable proportion of the population that we could add to our 70 million all those Bernie brothers who were burned, twice in the past 5 years. They're potential allies in this fight. It's not so longer about Trump. It's more about saving Western civilization. And they could pick the left has always done a good job of defending the First Amendment rights and rights to assemble and that sort of angle of the Constitution. And they should be emboldened to sort of pick up that leftist banner that everybody seems to have dropped during the 4 years that President Trump was around. The hippie banner from the '60s now makes more sense.
That's my banner, and I was the Bernie guy, and just like George Webb, I came into this from basically the same idea that I basically was a leftist, and I kind of still have that instinct of we should be helping the poor people at home before we should be doing anything else. But that nationalist leftist I really feel that if we can't get our own people above the poverty line, then what business do we have out in the world trying to correct somebody else's world? But that essence of there is some goodness in the left side of our politics. And there's a gentleman, I don't know if you've seen him yet, but his name is Garland Nixon.
No, I watch him.
Okay, well, he is joining me now on Monday nights, beginning next Monday. He comes from the left side, and he is one of the most articulate people I've run into in this whole past few years. I think there's a lot of hope in Garland Nixon and his ability to communicate with folks that probably might not listen to you or me, but just because of him and his experience in the Washington area, and especially as an insider of the criminal justice system for so long, that he can talk seriously about what we lose if we throw the Constitution away. He's with us on preserving sovereignty, on preserving the rule of law, and not trying to run some other country's lives the way the deep state is always trying to do.
Oh, definitely. And just from the research, I mean, I've been pushed more towards the left. I was never one I was never much interested in the sort of the prison reform or the incarceration of African Americans as an issue, but you sort of see that there wouldn't be drugs in Los Angeles in the 1980s if the CIA wasn't shipping it in there. I mean, people have been screaming that for years, and but look who took the hit for it. I mean, the entire communities took the hit for it. Nobody who made really the big bucks and that were shipping this stuff over, and whether it's the Bushes or other aspects of the CIA, they never took a hit for it, or they criminalized small amounts of marijuana. Now it's legal. I mean, it's such an arbitrary thing to throw people in jail for when you just legalized it. There's never anything wrong with it to begin with.
That was how they justified their budgets at the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, was by busting people that did non-dangerous, non-narcotic drugs.
Right. But you can see the broader social engineering aspects of it, though, because they'll always have a grand plan. We'll destroy this community, we'll split it up, and then we don't have to worry about them. We'll move on to the next one. We'll make opioids for suburban white kids and try and alienate them and destroy that aspect, or veterans who were opioided up.
Yeah, and that you well said, because we haven't mentioned that tonight, but the opiate tragedy keeps on. I mean, it's just still always growing and growing and growing. So many people like Gary Webb have made tremendous sacrifice their health, their lives, their careers in order to expose it, and yet it still goes on. It still goes on in bigger and bigger quantities all the time. I didn't want to let the hour run out without directing you back to George de Mohrenschildt, though. You promised me some information that you've been studying about him, and as you know, he's been the focus of my show for the past week or so. George de Mohrenschildt.
Right. That's why originally I thought we'd spend more time on George, but we got into Murphy, but that's fine. Just some interesting, like, and I think I've mentioned some of this stuff before, but I always sort of contend that George was less of a petroleum engineer or petroleum explorer and more of a uranium explorer, just from some of his. Because almost from the perspective of he'll always say he's a petroleum engineer, but he very rarely mentions uranium. But he was he was picked up in Mexico, in uranium country. I found his travels over the 40s and 50s. He's in Nigeria, France, Mexico, Ghana, Togoland, Yugoslavia, Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba, all uranium type countries. His second wife was a woman named Wynne Sharples, and the Sharples family were Quakers, which is interesting again for another reason. But the Sharples made centrifuges. They originally started out with sort of a centrifuge for in the early part of the century for farm processing, farm food or something like that. But I believe that the Sharples centrifuges were used during the Manhattan Project to spin uranium. He knew what uranium was, and one of the coincidences, and it's probably not a coincidence at all, but George de Mohrenschildt spent almost all of 1957 or his 58, I believe it was 57, in Yugoslavia, and that was the same period that George Ignatieff, the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations eventually, and uranium and atomic weapons expert. He was Canada's ambassador to Yugoslavia the exact same time that de Mohrenschildt was traveling around Yugoslavia. I believe de Mohrenschildt was there about 8 months in 1957 or maybe into 1958. So I would contend that a lot of his petroleum exploration trips were probably more uranium exploration trips, and if that ever comes out, that's an interesting angle because you start to get into a lot of intrigue around the Israeli nuclear weapons program. On one of my pages here, there's a document showing that John Kerry's father, Richard Kerry, was brokering heavy water between Norway and Israel in 1958. And I'm trying to find out if they ever crossed paths because George de Mohrenschildt, I believe, attended the uranium mining school in Colorado. Colorado, somebody will correct me, but call it Colorado Mining University, whatever it's called. John Kerry was actually born in Colorado, and it does have a town. It's the same town where the university is. It's right outside of Denver. So I always wondered if Richard Kerry and George de Mohrenschildt ever crossed paths at the uranium school, Colorado Mines and the uranium school.
Richard who?
Richard Kerry, who's the father of John Kerry.
John Kerry, the senator.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and the water surfboarder guy with the
right.
surf kite, whatever he does. He
does. Kite surfer, right?
Yeah, and the father of famous or stepfather of Chris Heinz, the partner in Burisma, not Burisma, but the whole Chinese thing with Hunter Biden.
Of course.
All of that
related to Mohrenschildt's friends, the Paynes.
The Paynes, yes.
He's also related to them.
I was also reading today that he also knew both Earl Cabell and General Cabell, the mayor of Dallas, and all of that. De Mohrenschildt was was the real deal. And I'll keep an eye out for his uranium stuff. I was pretty astonished about this big oil well that he found in the Fogelkop part of New Guinea that I was reading about the other night, and how once it got found, and then MacArthur found it and said, "Hey, we could use this. Let's put it to work for the war effort." And the powers that be said, "No, just keep it on the quiet. We're not going to talk about that yet." And they didn't actually, quote, discover it until the 70s, and then lo and behold, they had a huge gusher going on. Well, go ahead.
As you said, I'll give you another angle of what might have been going on in Indonesia. So another corporation that shows up in the JFK files is suspicious, but nobody really ever has an answer to it, is Freeport Sulphur. And Freeport Sulphur, one of the articles, I think Lisa Pease wrote, was the idea behind Freeport Sulphur is that they were involved because they wanted their Cuban nickel mine back after Castro took it. And I always thought that was stupid, because Canada has more nickel than any country in the world. They have the largest. The entire province of Ontario is known for its nickel, so they don't need a Cuban. But Freeport Sulphur was mining sulfur. They were in the sulfur business, and you needed sulfur to make yellow cake. You need a lot of it. So if you have a ton of enriched uranium, you're going to need 50 tons of sulfur. And in those days, in the prior to the 1970s, it was mined in places like Indonesia, where all the sulfur, where the volcanoes are, and the original sulfur mines were in Sicily on Mount Vesuvius. But there was a huge need for this sulfur, especially. It was always used for fertilizer, but once it became a byproduct or part of the catalyst process of enriching uranium, it needed astronomical amounts of it. So I always thought that they were looking for a sulfur. Freeport Sulphur was involved because they needed it too. They needed their sulfur deposits to make sure that they got enough for the uranium.
But I just want to jump in because we're running out of time quickly. But the Freeport Company was also the name of the people that ran the gold mine that was discussed in the JFK book. It's called the Grasberg Mine. If you want to check it out, Grasberg. And that's all the time we got tonight. Another fun and quick hour with you, Bill. Thank you so much.
That was always fun.
All right. And Andy DiBala, thanks you also again for putting us together with great video, great audio, and always supplementing things with your graphics. So we'll see you again tomorrow night here on McDuff Lives. I'll be reviewing the book Seeds of Destruction by F. William Engdahl to talk about, it's my 1 hour summaries that I do Wednesday nights, and we'll review all the important things that Mr. Engdahl included there, especially about NSSM 200 and the use of food and genetically modified food as a weapon of population control. So we'll be discussing that tomorrow night. And Bill Taylor, your blog is called once again D-State Analytics.
Yep, D-State Analytics will get you there if you just put in the search bar. Don't use Google. Use something else.
All right, and we didn't get to catch up on Gibson Island, so next time we'll cover Gibson Island news. Okay.
All right. Very good.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.